The most important thing that will happen is that we will not be able to borrow so easily as we do today. That's the single most important thing that I want to leave the viewers with. Because today we almost take it as on face value that we can just go and borrow and borrow and borrow, and there will always be somebody to buy our bonds. And even I think this week, the Treasury already announced that they'll begin to sell 20-year bonds. And when you are offering 20-year bond to a country at very low interest currently, because we are at a very low interest environment in the world today, then people need to have faith in the system and faith that they will see their money back. And if you take, for example, a country like China, we borrowed from China over $1 trillion now in various bonds. Actually, it's a much higher figure if you add Hong Kong and other.
And their holdings of Fannie and Freddie Mac and what they do through emissaries like Belgium and so forth. Yeah, it is higher, no question.
I would estimate it around $1.4 trillion.
Okay.
And when we want to sustain those kind of deficits, we have to really figure out how we can get the Chinese to continue to buy our bonds at an environment when the relations are not great. So, or else we need to decide on new priorities and try to figure out how to cut those crazy deficits. Because when you run a deficit of $1 trillion a year, how many years can you sustain this?
I think that's your point. If we got cut off in borrowing, it's like a family who sees the credit limit imposed. They thought they had an unlimited credit card, and then all of a sudden American Express or Visa comes in and says, oh, no, here's your maximum. Well, our lifestyle is built on unlimited credit. Here's the other problem. We can monetize that debt, and countries have tried it. Venezuela's tried it, Zimbabwe tried it, Weimar Germany tried it. But if you continue that lifestyle without addressing the ability to find people to actually fund it, you then end up printing the money yourself, like the Federal Reserve, and monetize the debt. And the end result, if you're not the reserve currency, is pretty poor. It impacts our lifestyle. You know, you look at Venezuela and you wonder, how did they get to hyperinflation? Well, part of it is that nobody wants their currency.
Exactly, and that's, I think, the risk that many of the younger viewers probably have not lived through a period of high inflation.
Right.
We've almost forgotten what high inflation looks like, but this is something that could certainly come back. We're running today the most audacious experiment in the history of economics, that almost 12 years we've been in a near zero interest rates globally. And we have in this process inflated huge bubbles of real estate, equities, and most importantly, derivatives, which is a very interesting discussion for another day. But these are in the many, many trillions of dollars. We don't know how it's going to play out. But what we do know is that interest rates cannot remain at zero forever.
Right.
And at some point, the cost of servicing our debt is going to be the number one expenditure of the U.S. government. And it will come at the expense of education, health, defense, etc.
No question. And if that happens, our lifestyle, the American lifestyle, is going to go down, not up. Things won't get better, they will get worse. And the problem is it's going to happen at a time where socialism is rearing its head politically, and this is, Lenin's dream to destroy America as the currency gets debauched. So that is a serious problem. Now, you outlined some threats in your book. You talked about our debt. You also talked about the tendency to use economic sanctions as a weapon in every instance possible, which makes them less valuable the more often that you use them and makes other nations resent the dollar's reserve currency. You talked about our adversaries and potential enemies, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. but you even talked about some of our allies in Europe and how they resent the dollar's unique status. Can you share a couple of those thoughts?
Yeah, since the book was published, actually a number of other countries were added to the list. All of a sudden, we're talking about sanctions against Germany for building a pipeline to Russia. And we want to put sanctions on Egypt for buying Russian weapons, and the same thing to do to India. And one of the problems is we have more than 500 members of Congress, and each of them has his own pet project or issue that he or she cares about. So today it's Egypt, tomorrow it's Hong Kong, the next day it's Germany. And while all of these causes are good causes and they may be very important, but the cumulative impact of all of this is that sanctions have become the go-to solution in our foreign policy because we don't want to use force anymore. So the second best is sanctions. But the problem is that when you apply this too often, you are only feeding this club of countries. And by the way, it's not only countries, also corporations, it's banks, it's wealthy individuals, all kind of oligarchs and billionaires. So it adds up, and before you know, it's like a death by 1,000 cuts type of situation that they're all doing their little things, but eventually you find yourself like Gulliver, tied to the ground by all these midgets.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the things that was exposed when we did Iranian sanctions is we got a copy of internal emails at Standard Chartered Bank, for example, that got caught violating the sanctions. And the email said things like, "You effing Americans, who are you to tell us what to do?" So it creates a resentment. And that resentment, if it builds to a large enough group, it destroys America's respect in the world. And at that point, the sanctions won't have any value left.